London at the protest that's taking place throughout today. We've seen thousands of people in the City of London. Welcome, Anthony. It'd be great to have you on the show to talk about what's going on in London.
Hello, Dan. Well, it's been pretty successful. We've had quite a few thousand people here, particularly earlier on. There have been a lot of speeches. We're now sort of past 6 o'clock and a number of people have gone, but there's still probably a couple of thousand left. And it's been a good day, particularly for a beginning of the week rally, because generally we have more success with getting people at a Saturday at the weekend. But this will continue tomorrow and on Wednesday. So those people who are not able to make today will be very welcome to turn up tomorrow, basically from about sort of 12 o'clock midday onwards. And obviously there's a lot of fighting people here because as you mentioned earlier, there's been this announcement by Boris Johnson about the need to have vaccines to go in nightclubs and evening venues. And these are big issues which we need to fight because they're to do with telling people in business how they operate their own business, and they're to do with telling people how to operate their own lives individually and how to work at their own medical freedom issues out. So the government seems to have gone away from the issue of individuals being able to make their own informed medical consent decisions. So it's very, very concerning. And we have got a big fight against us all. And I think there's more and more feeling that the many, many freedom movements need to be working more together because certainly with the vaccine agenda, the COVID-19 vaccine agenda of the government, we need to put more emphasis into that to explain to people that 99% of the population don't even need it, that many members of the public don't even know that it's an experimental vaccine and it won't be considered for MRHA licensing until at least 2023. So there are basic facts about these vaccines which the public are not being given the sort of correct information on. So I think there are big issues to do with freedom, medical freedom, and the powers of the government which need to be campaigned on over the next few weeks. But I think one of the major issues is we've got to get across to the public that the mainstream media is directly or indirectly controlled by the government. And as soon as people realise that the government is actually controlling the media agenda, they will not be so trusting of what the government actually says to them. And somebody from one of the Eastern European countries said to me the other day, she said, the trouble with you in the UK is you trust your government. We instinctively don't trust our government, so we always question everything we're told. Now, the problem basically is too many of the public are sort of not questioning what they're told and accepting it. And we had that very interesting article by the chairman of the 1922 committee about the Stockholm syndrome and about how people are being totally brainwashed in doing whatever the government is requiring them to do. So these are issues we need to fight on, and I think we're going to become more and more united on these very important issues because they're to do with us slowly and surely being taken over by an authoritarian government, a government which, you know, our forebears fought against authoritarianism in the Second World War and since then. And now we're having almost like a coup d'etat, that we have a government in power. They're taking away the freedoms of the country and the public without any electoral mandate. So you'll have to excuse that noise. I think it's some dogs barking, so nothing to be too worried about. So far today, the rally has been pretty peaceful, very impressive. The only problem is the police have been very strictly controlling the situation, and I would say giving us a lot less freedom of movement than they would give to protest movements which are perhaps favoured by the Mayor of London. So I think if, that's a sort of summary. If there's anything else you want to ask in more detail, feel free to do so.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, to call upon what you've talked there about, a lot of people know it's Freedom Day here in England, and people are saying, well, why is there a protest? Well, firstly, to draw out, what's been on the news this evening from 5 o'clock, where it's been revealed that by the end of September, everyone aged 18 and over would have had the chance to receive the vaccines, and therefore they're going to make full vaccination a condition of entry to nightclubs and other large venues where crowds gather. And a proof of negative test will no longer be sufficient. And of course, he mentioned that this, Boris talked about this, but also Nadine Zahawi talked about this will obviously be subject to parliamentary scrutiny. But we've seen there's been really very little parliamentary scrutiny on any of these matters, very little time to debate, and somehow they're still sweeping through the different phases. So what's your view in terms of what people can do here now to start to tackle some of these issues, and are protests enough?
Well, obviously we're outside Parliament where these decisions are made in theory, but of course the last vote we had on mandatory care home staff vaccination, we only had 211, I think it was, MPs voting against them, but voting against that particular measure. But the problem is that the government, when they're having a vote in Parliament, they're not giving the public any time to lobby their MPs. So no. I think what we have got to do is think very carefully and get in a couple more parliamentary petitions, which means things will have to be voted on. But I do think we've got to be outside as many of the vaccination centres as possible and give out the information to the people who are looking to be vaccinated, because most of them don't know the risks they're under. I also think it's really overdue for our freedom movement to take the government to court on fundamental freedom issues like medical freedom, compulsion, individual liberty. I also believe that we must ask for a national referendum on these issues. They had one in Switzerland recently, and I think the government would be terrified of having a referendum in this country, because we would have to be given equal time with those who want to take away our freedoms and our medical choice. So I think there's a lot of options ahead. We've got to do lots of very sensible strategic thinking, but we've got to fight them on the legal front, because it does appear when the government is combated on the legal front, they back down. So I think that is the way forward. And, a plea to all the key people in the, up to 600 local and national anti-lockdown groups. We really must work much more together. We need to look at having a set slogan which we can all identify under, a bit like when the referendum campaigns were on. You remembered each side by the slogan they went for. So there's a lot of strategic thinking which needs to be done. We've got to do more naming and shaming of government ministers who are being so authoritarian in their actions. And we must demand that this particular issue regarding vaccine passports and nightclubs and so on, we must demand that there is a parliamentary debate on it. And I think we've been far too muted. We've got to be stronger in what we do. Stronger doesn't mean that we do stupid things, but stronger means that we're much more clever, much more effective. And one of the key things is we must be seen to be working together. And
Yes.
as somebody said to me today, they said the government sees that the freedom movement is not united, so they feel they can walk all over us. We've got to show in every way possible that we are united. We're stronger together. When we get the numbers out, we are very strong in our force. But we have to do so much more on the political front as well. And that will include making an effort with local elections and the by-elections which come up, because we have made the mistake with things like the mayor election in London and elsewhere, where we had a number of freedom candidates standing against each other. You only need to look at the London mayor elections, and all the 5 freedom from lockdown candidates had more votes than the Liberal Democrat candidate. But if you looked at the votes individually, they were not really that brilliant. So there's a lot we need to do, but I think we also need to be proud of the work we have done, because most of us never knew each other many months ago. But we come together, we work together, we've done a huge amount with very little organisation, very little structure, and we must be proud of what we've achieved, even though there's an immense task ahead of us. So perhaps we have got the government on the run, and as we got the government on the run, a bit like that Second World War song, Run Rabbit, we've got Hitler on the run, or however it went, we've got the government on the run, and we've got to strike hard with this proposal that that you have to have a vaccine passport to go in evening venues. We must put a stop to that immediately. And anything outrageous like that, we must demand that it doesn't happen. So I think that those are some of the things I think we need to do.
Thank you, Anthony. And interesting enough, we've just had Pam Popper on the podcast just before we spoke, where we were speaking about what they've been doing in America with the Make Americans Free Again campaign. Very organized, very strategic, very clear legal cases that they're taking forward. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to take a more coordinated, organized, strategic approach here in the UK and work together with groups internationally, because this is not just the UK situation. We're all facing the same rollout of this ideology of vaccination passports, and left unaddressed, our liberties will soon erode.
That's exactly right, Dan. And obviously, we've got to work more with other people. Of course, a lot of things happen in other countries in the world, but we never get to hear about it because the government is controlling the media. And that's another job we have got, to expand the alternative media, and the good job people like yourself actually does. You've been doing a great job for months. Well, sorry, longer than that. But, we've got to get across to the public that they have to stand up and fight for their rights, because they're not, rights are not something we have to beg our government for. They are things which inbred in us, we have in our ancient British Constitution, and we need to make sure they're not taken away from us. So there's a huge amount which needs to be done, but perhaps sometimes we get a little bit down and don't realise that perhaps it's going to be easier than we think to regain our rights, because at the end of the day, this government is governing the country without any form of electoral mandate for any of the COVID-19 decisions they've made. So we must demand that there is electoral consent to these things, which is why I feel very strongly we need to demand that there's a referendum, and that referendum would state that it would never ever be anything like a COVID-19 act again without the permission of the public through a referendum.
Anthony, that's a great point. But in terms of the culture of fear that's been generated and the persistent narrative that's emerged throughout the media, which influences so many people's perception of what's going on, do you honestly think with a referendum you would win the vote?
Well, I think I was quite encouraged, because in Switzerland they managed to get one, and the government rather cleverly had a total of 5 referendums on at the same time to confuse the public. But even with that, those who wanted to vote against the COVID-19 regulations got 40% of the vote. So I think in this country, where we traditionally have one subject at a time, where in theory both sides have got to be given equal time, that we would have a pretty good chance of winning. You have to sort of bear in mind that yes, the media are controlled, and yes, there would still be more sort of voices in favour of the government's line, but at least we would have the opportunity to put our case forward, because for 18 months we haven't been able to put our case forward in the British media, either nationally or locally. And if we have in some small way, it's been by luck and a huge amount of hard work by some of us.
Indeed, I think my concern with the referendum would be that, you know, if the vote goes against the liberties that we stand to lose, then it would become legally binding and very difficult then to come forward. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. So
we mustn't be pessimistic. We've got to be on the onslaught. In any battle, you can lose that battle. But you know, one of the key things we're saying is this government is acting with no consent. So we mustn't be afraid of a referendum. We must, in my opinion, fight for one, but also fight for that referendum to be fair.
Yes.
And now it may well be that the pressure for a referendum would make the government backtrack because they are on sticky ground. They don't want to be in a position where they've got to defend their position. You know, for 18 months, they haven't had to defend their position, except from people like the fake opposition who want them to do even worse things. So I don't think we've got anything to lose. And it's like if you're defending your families and your children, you put everything into it. It is a key weapon, the issue of democracy. We're fighting for democracy. So we would have to take the risk we would win the referendum. But first of all, we've got to petition for it. I think we made a great mistake in the freedom movement not going for this earlier. I remember when people were talking about it before, others were saying, oh, well, we will be out of lockdown. Now, that was a year ago. So I think we are going to have to take action. Now, referendum may be one means. I mean, obviously, legal action is another.
Yes,
pressure on members of parliament, but basically questioning everything they're doing. And we should really have done more about the vaccination centres and questioning why people should have an experimental vaccine. And we've got plenty of arguments. As somebody said to me the other day, we don't need conspiracy theories to win this argument. All we need is the facts. So yes, there are some pretty awful things going on, and there are conspiracies against the British public, and obviously our government is not acting democratically. But the bottom line is we can win this on straightforward, logical arguments, and that's been shown by those who signed the Great Balfour Declaration, many thousands of medical professionals and scientists. So anyway, I think there's somebody in the background there, but clearly things are still going here. So it's great that there is an atmosphere, and we're starting to have some music, which is something fundamental. So
well, Anthony, in that case, I'll let you get back to the party. Thank you very much for sharing what's happening there in London and your views on how we move forward. Excellent timing right after our interview with Pamela Popper. If you missed the interview, for the audience watching live, do go and check out the previous interview with Pamela Popper, who spoke at length about some of the things Anthony shared here today. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you,
have a great evening.
All the
Thank
best.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Now, those at home, if you didn't see my interview with Pamela Popper, we'd be just from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, just taking place right now on the Pandemic Podcast. You can see it on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. You'll see that we had a deep conversation about what she has been doing in America to make Americans free again. Some really interesting lessons about how we can become more organized and strategic in the United Kingdom. So if you haven't seen that, please do check that out. And we'll be back again tomorrow to ask the question, free, what does freedom mean? How free are we? And how long will freedoms last? And in the context of what we've just heard here tonight, these are very important questions. And it is our goal to ask more questions. If you weren't with us at the weekend, very first summit here in London, under Everything brand, where we had a lockdown summit, a full day event, 18 different speakers arguing the facts that Anthony mentioned there today. We can win the argument on the facts. We must get this concrete information out to the people. So please do check out the summit. If you haven't watched 9 hours of content, we're going to break it all up into individual talks. You can just go to questioneverything.io and to register to receive that content and gain access to that 9-hour summit where we've laid out the evidence, the critical evaluation of the response, but also started to explore solutions about how we move forward. So once again, thanks very much. I'll be back at 5 p.m. tomorrow to ask free, and how long are we free, and what can we do from here? So thank you very much. Good night to you all, and have a wonderful evening.